in a reservoir after extreme drought. Archaeologists had a field day digging up thousands-year-old ceramic artifacts. The sunken city is believed to date back to the Bronze Age, and it was excavated earlier this year after water levels dropped, allowing its remains to briefly see the light of day. It is now back underwater. Researchers continue to look for clues about who built the city. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Aaron is back tomorrow. AC 360 starts now.
Good evening. Tonight, members of the January 6th committee and their staffs are preparing for the fourth hearing tomorrow that'll zero in on two key elements of what the committee has called Donald Trump's plan to overturn the election. We'll hear witnesses from Georgia and Arizona testify about pressure they felt from the former president and his allies to decertify President Biden's wins in those states. We'll also hear perhaps the most detailed account to date of one of the most bizarre elements of the former president's scheme, the attempt, devoid of any legal basis, to get alternate and completely imaginary slates of electors installed from 7 states to swing the election to the former president. This is what it looked like in Michigan back in December when those fake electors actually showed up at the State House and tried to talk their way past police.
We're electors.
The electors are already here. They've been checked in.
Ian's here.
They're
also
also
the electors are inside.
Capitol Hill. All 16 electors that we've been advised by the governor's staff that we're going to be here to vote in the Electoral College have been checked in. They're already here.
But the GOP electors.
These are the rest of the electors.
These are the rest of the electors. There's no such thing. It may seem ludicrous watching that, but according to testimony that we'll hear more of tomorrow, this was part of a multi-pronged scheme by the president and his allies to overturn the results of the election. It is unprecedented in our history. Now, the seriousness of what occurred and the risk being taken by some members of the January 6th committee are important to remember. On Sunday, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a Republican member of the committee, tweeted a letter he said he'd received at his home. It was addressed to his wife and mentioned how both she and her husband and their child would be executed. He warns it's a vision of what's to come in our politics and in our country.
There is violence in the future, I'm going to tell you. And until we get a grip on telling people the truth, we can't expect any differently.
Well, over the weekend, Republican Dan Crenshaw, a retired Navy SEAL, was harassed while at a Texas Republican convention. Mediaite quotes people who say they witnessed several individuals accosting Crenshaw and his staff. At least one used a crude remark coined by a Fox News host to make light of the eye that Crenshaw lost during his service. One female staffer of his was also reportedly, quote, pushed aggressively into a pillar. Extremism is on the rise, and some candidates are trying to use it to their advantage. Case in point, Eric Greitens, a former governor of Missouri who's running now for Senate, he's put out an ad that we're not going to play, but we'll show you a still from it. Greitens is shown holding a firearm, talking about going rhino hunting. You can see smoke in the background, as well as some sort of commando-type looking people. Rhino, obviously, is an acronym for Republicans in name only. He then cocks the gun in the ad. He's next outside a house with armed men in camouflage talking about rhinos. Then they burst into the home, and he talks more about bagging a rhino. Now, we should point out that Greitens left office 4 years ago after a report by Missouri State House alleged he subjected a woman to non-consensual sexual activity and violence. He denied the allegations, but he left in disgrace. Then earlier this year, his ex-wife, who is in a custody battle for their children, alleged in a court document that he was physically abusive toward her and their children. She says she grew so afraid of her former husband that she sought to limit his access to weapons and began sleeping in her children's room out of concern for their safety. He denies those allegations. Now he's trying to mount a political comeback with an ad showing him with a firearm bursting into a house, talking about hunting for Republicans who are not as extreme as I guess he would like them to be. I'm joined now by another member of the January 6th committee, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. Congresswoman Lofgren, when you hear your fellow committee member Adam Kinzinger with that threatening letter that he says he received from to his family, it's obviously extremely disturbing. In a larger picture, though, how concerned are you about our inability as a country, it seems, or in our politics, to not give in to this extremism? It seems like the extremism is on the rise, not just in these, kind of physical confrontations, but also just in rhetoric. The extremes get all the attention. The extremes seem to make it impossible to actually get things done.
Well, most people in America don't intend to engage in violence around politics. So I think we need to look at where is the missing leadership here, where elected officials of both parties will stand up and say, this type of rhetoric or activity is not acceptable, and condemn it. You know, the ad where the candidate is apparently with assault weapons going in to bag so-called rhinos. I haven't heard anybody today from the Republican leadership condemning that. I think it's important that that happen. And I think we've got to get back to the kind of country that we all expect, where you can have a disagreement on a policy issue. It doesn't make the other person that you don't agree with your enemy. It means that you and another American might have a different point of view.
Yeah.
That's the way we need to deal with things.
I want to talk about tomorrow's hearing. It's going to focus on state and local officials who claim they were pressured by members of the Trump campaign, including Rudy Giuliani and the former president himself, to support false states of electors. Are there new details that Americans that we will hear tomorrow?
Yes, as always, there are some things that are known and then some things that I think people will see new. I'm not going to step on the committee. That's why we're going to have the hearing tomorrow to lay out the information that has been collected. But I think it's worth watching, and I think people will learn from it.
Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson recently said the committee was, in his words, engaging with former Vice President Pence's lawyers. Do you believe there's still a chance that Pence would speak to the committee? Would you support a subpoena in order to get him to testify?
Well, I would love to have him come in. Whether he would or not remains to be seen. We have actually heard and learned a lot because so many of his people came in and spoke very robustly to us. But we could still learn a little more if he came in. At this point, we have to weigh whether, if we issue a subpoena, do we end up in a 6-month court fight, or do we get someone to come in? We have to weigh all those issues, but I wish he just would come in. I think it would help us fill out the entire picture, and I think it would be good for our country and therefore good for him.
You've said previously the committee would release more information about fundraising efforts by the former president, his campaign,
Right.
so-called official election defense fund, that there wasn't such a thing, but it went directly into the former president's super PAC. You're calling it the big ripoff. When is that going to be released? Do you have more you can say on what it is?
Well, the staff is working to put together a document that we can release that will fill out the details, and I'm hoping that will be done in the next few days. There was more interest in this than I had anticipated, and of course, in a 2-hour hearing, you can't lay out all the information that you've gotten. So we'll fill out a little bit more, I hope, in the next few days.
Congressman Zoe Lofgren, appreciate your time. Want to get
Anytime.
perspective now from U.S. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, who was attacked by the rioters on January 6th, testified last year. Denver Riggleman, a former senior technical advisor to the January 6th committee, former Republican congressman from Virginia, and CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger. Congressman Riggleman, the gross tonnage of all this rhetoric, this kind of extremist rhetoric that we've been hearing, whether it's what we saw on January 6th, the threats faced by Republican officials now like Congressman Kinzinger, this ad from the Greitens, what does it say to you about where we are right now and where our politics, our country is heading?
I think that type of extremism is starting to get a little bit baked into certain portions of the GOP. And I mean, I saw it really here with the amount of death threats I had after I did the same-sex wedding in August of 2019. And even after my appearance with you on June 1st, we've actually had to shut down our company email. We actually got so many emails that were talking about pedophilia, they were talking about killing people, they were talking about bounties, that at some point my wife and daughters actually called me in and said, we're getting so many emails now, we need to shut down the link on the website. So Anderson, when you're listening, what's happening to Adam, what's happened to people in the party, what's happened to Democrats, what's happened to all these individuals, it seems like a, like a go-to, that either these type of threats, it's just one of those things that you sort of live with. But we're to a point now, we've seen so much violence that these threats aren't empty. And that's the problem that I have with all of this. And Anderson, at some point, we're going to have some kind of leadership address this. And right now you're not seeing it. If Eric Greitens can go out and do a video about hunting rhinos with assault weapons or kicking in doors. You have a bunch of door kickers since he's a former Navy SEAL. The issue is he's talking to live action role players. He's talking to LARPers, and any idiot can pull a trigger. Any idiot can do something stupid. So the problem is that you have people that could be being radicalized because of this type of sort of ridiculous buffoonery, and somebody who maybe through polling thought that the Second Amendment was so important that he needs to threaten other individuals.
Yeah, I mean, look, we had a guy try to, according to authorities, kill a Supreme Court justice at his home. Gloria, what does it say to you that Adam Kinzinger, Dan Crenshaw, two young, very conservative military veterans, that kind of figures whom the Republican Party once upon a time would have embraced and celebrated, and understandably so, that they are targets of such vitriol?
I think I can add Liz Cheney to that list. I mean, look, the Republican Party right now is in a very dark, dark place. And I think what's going on is that the leadership of the Republican Party, such as it is holding its breath because they don't want to do anything to rock the boat so they can win over the Congress in the midterm elections. They figure they're going to control the House, they have a good shot at controlling the Senate, and they don't want to do anything that shows the American public how split and divided and angry parts of the party are. And so, Congresswoman Lofgren was saying, where's the leadership? Why aren't we hearing from them? I think she asked a very good question. You need to hear from the leadership on both sides when things like this happen. And we are not hearing it right now on the Republican side because they're just waiting to take control of the Congress, get what they want from the American electorate, and then maybe they'll start to deal with this.
Problem is, Officer Dunn, as you know all too well, this isn't something you kind of control. Once this gets out of hand, it's not as if suddenly political leaders can say, okay, now that we're in power, we're not going to do this stuff anymore. You have people starting to attack their own. You have, folks in the Republican Party in Texas going after Dan Crenshaw, calling him a globalist. It's to be this far past January 6th, Officer Dunn, and to still have this political climate. Does it concern you?
It's very concerning. You got to think about it. Like nobody, Dan Crenshaw, Adam Kinzinger, nobody, Liz Cheney deserves the threats on their lives, the threats on just because they have a specific policy view or disagreement with somebody. And early in the segment, you showed something about Adam Kinzinger talking about that's why it's important to get the truth out. The truth doesn't matter to a lot of these extremists. They don't care. You literally had a sitting member of Congress complain that they will get you for lying to them. A sitting member of Congress said they will get you. So the truth doesn't matter to these people.
That was Louis Gohmert.
Yeah, that's why it's very important for the Justice Department to do their job and do their roles. There's so much only Congress can do. There's so much only law enforcement can do. The Justice Department has to step in and do their job now with the facts out there. The facts matter to the Justice Department. It seems like a lot of the American public, or at least the extremists, don't really care about the actual facts about it because they'll just say they're lying. So the truth doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
it's falling upon deaf ears.
Congressman Riegleman, when the hearings reconvene tomorrow, what do you think the committee needs to accomplish, and how important do you think are the witnesses from Georgia, which was so central to the former president's effort to overturn the election?
Well, I think they're very important, and you heard Zoe earlier. This is going to be a very important hearing. I think it's not only those Georgia officials. I think it's also every layer of individuals that were involved in pushing an alternate elector scheme or trying to pressure people to do things that they knew were out of bounds or illegal. And I think we can talk about Raffensperger, we can talk about Gabriel, we can talk about all these individuals. But I think what the committee is going to surprise people with are the number of people that were involved at every level. So you're not just talking about high-level officials. You're also talking about people in the specific parties. You're talking about activists. I think what people need to understand, again, is that one word, and Anderson, I've said it many times, people need to look for coordination. They need to look at where it's happening at every layer. They need to see if President Trump was aware that coordination was happening. And they need to look at that second layer right underneath of President Trump and how many individuals they were contacting. And then you got to look at the documentation and the data that supports it. So tomorrow, again, I think the committee is going to surprise the American people with the evidence that they have, but how they actually have interleaved the data to give a complete story of how these individuals were pressured and how these schemes came to be.
Gloria, I mean, if one of the goals, directly or indirectly, depending on whom you talk to, of the committee is to help build a case for the Department of Justice to prosecute the former president or some of his allies for the events of January 6th, How could tomorrow advance that effort?
Well, I think it's going to be very important because what you always look at is what was the president's intent. And when you talk about what went on in Georgia, for example, or what went on with the fake slate of electors, what I think the committee is going to try and show us all tomorrow is that the president not only knew about this illegal activity, but he was involved in the planning of it and in the pressuring of state officials to do what he wanted. Remember the infamous phone call with Brad Raffensperger, just find me the, 11,000 plus votes, et cetera. And you're going to find a president of the United States who was very involved in planning a coup. And in great detail, I think, that we have not seen before. But again, it goes to his intent. What was his intent? To stay in office no matter what.
Officer Dunn, you tweeted recently that people on right-wing networks spend time attacking you. You said that it doesn't really bother you anymore. Did the level of vitriol after you started talking about your experiences in January 6th, did it surprise you? Because I think people who have not experienced that kind of level of vitriol, it's hard to kind of imagine the impact it can have on somebody.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around it. Nobody goes in expecting that somebody's going to hate somebody who's doing their job and doing what they think is right and serving their country. It's hard to imagine that somebody can hate you for doing that or speaking out that, what's happening out there is wrong. It's hard to imagine that, but once you realize that, hey, this is the country that we're in, and a lot of the extremists, and like the previous Congresswoman just said, it's not a lot of people, it's just the extremists, they're the loudest, and they take up the most attention. But majority of Americans aren't like that. Just the ones that stand out the most are the extremists.
Yeah.
Yeah, it bothers you. It used to bother me, but you accept that there are more good people out there than bad ones, and you focus your time and attention and energy on those people.
Yeah, Harry Dunn, I really appreciate it. As always, Denver Riggin with thanks, Gloria Borger as well. Still to come tonight, new video evidence reviewed by Austin Media that may change our understanding of just how well armed police were when they initially arrived at the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. It could also undercut, once again, some of the narrative that police and authorities have given about their response. We'll have a live report from Uvalde next. Also tonight, an update on those missing Americans who went to fight for Ukraine, now believed to be held by Russia or Russian-backed separatists, their status, and who may be holding them next.
We share this place, we all belong. We have to restore this planet's soul. Give it water, give it sun, room to grow. I can see a better tomorrow. I can see a better tomorrow.
We've been building avatars since 2016, so I would say we haven't been chasing a moment. We've been building for this moment for quite some time and really studying, I think, the younger demographic and really where they're trending towards, which is really trying to express an authentic version of themselves. So, I've always felt comfortable behind a keyboard, right? So if I was in school, when I was growing up in middle school or in high school, I would be kind of nervous to maybe talk to a girl, or I'd be kind of nervous to go, show off in front of friends or communicate with friends or whatever. But as soon as I got home and I got into AIM and I got behind my username, I became the most outgoing and gregarious character that there was. You're able to create this manifestation of yourself in this very fantastical art form. So we hope that avatars can be that safe haven that allow you to express yourself from every different segment of your imagination and serve as your emotional surrogate.
mission here at CNN and journalists. The news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about an alleged plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
We have some new details tonight about the police response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Specifically, new video that could change how we've come to understand the initial police response, the shooter, and why it took more than an hour, despite repeated 911 calls for help from inside the classroom, before Border Patrol units stormed the class and killed the gunman. According to the Austin American Statesman, officers arrived at Uvalde School with rifles, ballistic shield, 9 minutes after the gunman. It means, in theory, police had the gear they needed to storm the classroom 9 minutes after this started, not 70-plus minutes. Tony Plahetsky, excuse me, Tony, it's Plahetsky, yes?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. It's Plahetsky, yeah.
Plahetsky, good. From the Austin American Statesman, joins me now. This just crossed. We are just getting you on right now. What more can you tell us about these documents and the images that you're reporting about?
Well, Anderson, of course, this is all being compiled as part of a huge investigation into what happened that awful day. But one of the things that is so striking about this image that we were able to obtain late today is that it shows in the minds of at least some investigators reviewing what happened that day is that authorities had adequate firepower and adequate protective equipment to take down the shooter long before they did. As you mentioned, they arrived at the scene. Several officers did early on. This photograph was taken at 10:52 a.m. It's a screen grab from video from inside that school. Of course, we now know that the gunman entered that elementary school around 11:33 in the morning. But Anderson, 58 minutes passed from the time we see these officers in that video, in that screen grab, to when they ultimately breached that classroom and took down the shooter.
So we were late in putting up a picture. So I just want to, if you could just explain what it is we're looking at here. We're just getting the images now. This is the hallway inside the school. On the right, it looks, on the left, where it looks like there's a police officer, and on the right, is that a shield sitting there?
That's exactly right. On the lower sort of right-hand part of the photograph. And then, of course, you see an officer with a rifle there as well. I think one thing that is also so haunting about what we're seeing in this photograph as well, Anderson, is that this is the first time we are actually seeing the inside of Robb Elementary School, a school that's very similar to the ones I know many of us went to across the country, and how in that very moment, in these few minutes, that school was transformed from an innocent place to one of an unimaginable massacre.
Yeah. So let me just zero in here. So the time here is 11:52:28. How long? I know you said this, but let's just repeat it. For how long into the shooting is this?
So the gunman walked into the building at 11:33 in the morning. That is the time that he walked into the elementary school. There were calls, obviously, for police officers to descend on the scene. One of the things, though, that is so striking, and Anderson, I want to point out that much of this information is going to be made public in a Senate hearing here in Austin tomorrow. But one of the things that is so striking is that we also have obtained a transcript of a phone call that the school police chief, Pete Arredondo, made to the Uvalde City Police at 11:40 a.m. Obviously about 10 to 12 minutes before this screen grab was taken. But Anderson, one of the things that he said in that phone call, again, I was able to review a transcript of it earlier, is that essentially all they have, according to him in that moment, were pistols. And so he's saying in this phone call, we need more firepower in order to try to take down this gunman.
At this point, in the image, we're just seeing one shield. There were reports earlier, I spoke to somebody earlier who said that it seemed like there were calls out for, they would get one shield and then they'd wait for another, and some more shields would come in. It's unclear at this point, I mean, how many shields you actually need to storm a classroom. Again, this is completely against all active shooter training, the idea of waiting for equipment, waiting for this kind of stuff to arrive.
And Anderson, we're still unpacking the timeline. I was able to, again, review it a short time ago. It is going to be made public. It is my understanding that much of this information is going to be made public tomorrow. But you can see there are notations in the timeline when additional ballistic shields are actually arriving, and they are arriving well before authorities there in that hallway essentially decided to breach the classroom. So again, another sort of devastating picture here that really only deepens questions about what happened that day and why. It's
so disturbing. Tony, stick around. I want to bring in our Shimon Prokupecz in Uvalde, who has been reporting there on and off for weeks. I'm wondering, Shimon, from all you know, what do you make of this new image, this new reporting from the Austin American-Statesman?
It's certainly significant, Anderson, because you're seeing officers there with long guns, with the type of firepower that they would need to storm through that classroom and what they call neutralize the gunman. The ballistic shield, whether they had it or not, I think the bottom line is what you're going to find from every law enforcement official, that they should have gone in and should have gone in sooner with whatever firepower they had. And with this new information, and you know, Anderson, in the last couple of days, new information is starting to come out. And part of what's happening here in this town is that this is politically becoming untenable, certainly for the politicians who are running this investigation. Everything is being done behind closed doors. The public does not have access to any of this testimony right now. As we know, the police have been providing no information at this point. They went from providing wrong information to fixing some of it up to continuing now to provide absolutely no information. So we're starting to see information come out, and what we're seeing is that it is really a bungled response, a response that should have been better, that should have been more aggressive, that should have really went after this gunman. And I can tell you, I was just behind me here, Anderson, I'm at the high school where family members are attending a school board meeting, and this is what you're hearing from them inside. They want accountability. They say the police here didn't do their jobs, and that's what they want. They want accountability. And there's this feeling where they just are not getting answers to the questions that they have about this response. And how is the school and the police department here going to keep their kids safe in the days and weeks and years to come? And there's still a lot of grief here. So there's still so many questions, right, Anderson? And I think what we're seeing now is it's starting to come out, and it's not going to get better for the police, clearly, as you see by this.
Yeah, and Tony, did police comment to the Austin American-Statesman? Because, I mean, you know, the lies that have been said, the misstatements, the incorrect information that's been given out time after time is really, really, I mean, shocking.
Which is to the point of, at this time, they just need to release everything. We know that there are hours and hours of video that helps tell the complete story. And because there is so much distrust, not only in that city, but frankly across the state and the nation at this point, investigators simply should just release as much information as they can, the video, that as much as they can. Anderson, nothing in state law here in Texas is prohibiting that. This is a choice that they are making at this point. But I think as more information continues to come to light, it ultimately is going to make it impossible for them to hide behind any aspect of state law that allows but does not require them to withhold this information.
Yeah, and we know, you know, Arredondo, Shimon, in the interview, you know, he reluctantly, or the comments he reluctantly made to you after you showed up at his work, you know, he hid behind grieving parents, saying, you know, once parents stop grieving, then, you know, he'll say something, you know, which is just a deeply unfortunate statement. If, you know, nobody is going to stop grieving the death of their children ever. Tony Plahetsky, I really appreciate this reporting. It's
Thank you,
extraordinary
Anderson.
to see this image. Shimon Prokupecz, thank you so much. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is up for re-election. Up next, we're going to have some new reporting about what he might be thinking about a run not for governor, but for president. It comes from the New Yorker magazine. We'll talk to the reporter ahead.
I'm Nick Watt in Los Angeles, and this is CNN.
Potato custodians are basically the guardians of the traditional knowledge, and they're also the guardians of the diversity itself.
There are about 4,000 varieties of native potato in the world, and most of them are grown in the Andes, while only a handful are available in supermarkets around the world.
Between the two of us, we have been growing these seeds for 20 years, preserving them since the day of our wedding. My mother told me, now I want to teach my daughters.
It's a laboratory that's not managed by scientists, but it's a laboratory that is basically more than 10,000 years of evolution in the hands of farmers.
I can't let them be forgotten, because all the flavors, I know now how to grow them, and in that way I can keep the varieties alive.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN Partner Hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
As Florida Governor Ron DeSantis faces a re-election campaign this year, and in the Republican Party, he's also considered to be one of the primary challengers for the 2024 presidential race. In new reporting for the New Yorker magazine, our next guest asks if DeSantis can displace the former president as the GOP's combatant-in-chief. He says the Florida governor channels the same rage as the former president, but with greater discipline. Joining me now with the New Yorker, Dexter Filkins. Dexter, it's a really fascinating article. Your profile describes DeSantis as someone who sounds like the former president, but, quote, speaks in complete sentences. How is he trying to convey that about himself without criticizing the former president?
That's Anderson. That's a really good question, because the kind of the dance between Trump and DeSantis right now is very complicated. They both live in Florida. You know, on the surface, they're both making nice, But DeSantis, you know, he radiates ambition. I mean, he wants to be president, and so it's totally clear. And I think we haven't seen, you know, the two of them, what exists between them hasn't been resolved yet. I mean, it just hasn't. I mean, it's like, is Trump going to run? You know, unclear. Does DeSantis want to run? Absolutely. He wants to run now. He's only 43 years old, but he's very, very impatient.
I mean, his background is really interesting. He went to, if a lot of people, maybe the only thing they know about him is that he does seem to kind of go after these hot button issues. And you talk about this in the piece, like criticizing Dr. Anthony Fauci over COVID safety measures, pushing what's been coined the "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida, things that get clicks, that make headlines. But he's also got, he went to Harvard Law School, he went to Yale undergraduate. I mean, this is a guy who has had, and was described, you talk to people who went to school with him, as incredibly, incredibly smart guy.
Yes, he really is. I mean, what's interesting about him is that he's from a working class family. You know, I talked to his father in the piece. I went to their house. It's just a very modest house. You know, Ron was really smart, the governor, when he was young, and he played baseball and he was really good, and he got into Yale and he went to Harvard. And I think he's got, this is my, I'm playing Sigmund Freud here, but I think he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder being around, all the Ivy Leaguers. But he's really smart. I mean, basically everyone I spoke to, including people who hated him, told me that, his IQ is not in question. He is really, really smart. It's just that when he gets in front of a crowd, he does his best to act like Trump, basically.
It's interesting, though, I mean, that he would choose to do that because, oftentimes governors are dealing with stuff which national politicians don't have to. It's people, they gotta, when there's a storm in their state, they're the ones on top of it. He clearly seems to have national ambitions and has for a long time.
Yes. And he has, basically from the moment that Trump left office began the flourishing of his relationship with with Fox News. And so he's been on Fox numerous times. They call him virtually every day to be on. And they've given him this kind of national platform. He's very articulate. He kind of radiates this kind of populist anger, which I think plays very well there. But Fox made him a national figure. I think it's fair to say. And now it's just off to the races. Because he knows, I mean, he feels it. You can tell when you hear him talk. He feels like he's ready. He's ambitious, like he's ready. The question is really like, what is Trump going to do? And then depending on what Trump decides, what is DeSantis going to do?
If Trump does say he's running, does DeSantis still run?
I don't know. I talked to former President Trump last week, and I was listening to every kind of inflection in his voice. And like one moment I would tell you, I think he's going to run. And the next moment it was like, I don't know, And so I don't know what he's going to do, what President Trump is going to do. With DeSantis, it seems to me, I think he wants to run, but it seems to me unlikely if Trump does, because they're competing for the same constituency. It's the same, it's the same people. It's the kind of the half the population that's kind of anti-elite and kind of angry about the last 30 years and, thinks and feels disdained by the kind of liberal establishment. That's his constituency. So it's hard for me to imagine that DeSantis would take Trump on.
He would also then be facing attacks from Trump that would turn that very constituency that he wants in the future against him. So again, that's probably part of the calculus as well. Dexter Filkins, a fascinating article in the New Yorker. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, take care. Up next, new details on the missing Americans fighting for Ukraine, where they are purportedly being held, and what Russia is now saying about them.
Sunday on CNN. In a year full of challenges, let's salute those using their platforms for good.
It's just so needed, and we have a lot more to do.
Join us as we shine a light on some familiar faces.
I have gotten a front row seat to what heroism is.
Turning words into action.
It makes us human.
If we still care, there is hope. CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Erin Burnett. Sunday.
Bollywood, a protracted pandemic fractured this more than a century-old industry, sending profits tumbling as in-theatre audiences stayed away. Analysts say India is still watching Bollywood at a record rate. They're simply doing so online.
I think we've reached significant scale during the pandemic. What we've seen is that the top 30 to 40 million, the premium audiences, they have taken extensively to OTT streaming.
Analysts say India's rapidly growing mobile internet population is behind much of this growth. Here in India, local homegrown players continue to thrive in the market.
Krishna Bhagwan.
Streaming giant ZEE5 claims to have the most offerings in South Asia.
Going digital was on the back of wanting to really connect directly with the consumer.
My name is Øystein Jensen. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Odfjell SE. It is important that shipping becomes sustainable. It is important that shipping moves towards zero because we are a part of the global value chain. We represent 2.8% of the total emission, and that emissions will still grow as the shipping industry will grow because the global demand for transportation is growing. And so the only solution is actually to go zero. Thank you to Sustainability Live. Being an event like this, I believe that is important because it gives you the wider understanding of the challenge. It gives us insight to areas that we haven't thought about, because this challenge is nothing one company can solve by themselves. So that's why we need to collaborate, and we need to collaborate across the industry.
These troops, they are Russian. I've spoken to the commander. He said they are now in control. Over that way. It's a secret location. They're going to fire on Russian forces. There has been a ferocious battle here. There's unexploded grenades everywhere. We're being shown the powerful American guns, giving them an edge.
You downplayed the US intelligence assessment. Do you now regret that?
I'm in Kiev right now, and it is under attack, Mr. Lavrov, from Russian forces. I'm being told by our security that we need to get our flak jackets on. No matter where you are in this country, lives are being shattered. There are thousands streaming out. It is at least a chance to save their own lives. Matthew Chance, CNN.
For World Sport, I'm Don Riddell, and this is CNN.
We have new details tonight on the missing American volunteer fighters in Ukraine. Russian President Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, spoke to NBC News, saying that Russia can't guarantee that they won't face the death penalty.
They're soldiers of fortune, and they were involved in illegal activities on the territory of Ukraine. They were involved in firing and shelling our military personnel. They were endangering their life. And they should be responsible. They should be held responsible for those crimes that they have committed.
According to Russian state media, the fighters were captured last week and are being held by Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk. CNN senior international correspondent Sam Kiley is in Kharkiv tonight with the latest. So what more are we learning about the Americans who are being held?
Well, it's a very sorry tale. According to the descriptions that they've given a Serbian TV station that interviewed them, and during that interview, the interviewer let slip that they were in Donetsk. That was the first confirmation that they were in this breakaway republic in the east of Ukraine. Alex Druki said that he had been captured, as indeed did Andrew Huen, on their first day in combat. They said that they were both fighting for something called Task Force Baguette, which was, they said, part of the Ukrainian armed forces, but a mixture of Ukrainian and foreign fighters. I have spoken myself to another American who was with them on the ground during that battle in a village about 25 kilometers outside to the northeast of Kharkiv, where I am now, Anderson. He said that they fired a shot from an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade at advancing a Russian armored personnel carrier. They said in their interview that they had missed it, and then they went missing as the group withdrew. Clearly now they've been captured. So the good news from the family's perspective is that they are alive. The bad news is that the last people to be accused of being soldiers of fortune or mercenaries in this breakaway republic were two Britons and a Moroccan who were captured in the southeast of the country around Mariupol. They have all been sentenced to death in a judicial process, if you could call it that, in this republic area, which is, of course, recognized only by the Kremlin and one or two Kremlin-supporting other states. It's a part of Ukraine. So under international law, there's no doubt that if they were part of the Ukrainian armed forces, they were not mercenaries. But that is not a defense that would appear to be accepted.
And so in Kharkiv, where you are right now, there's a buildup of Russian troops. That's an area where Russian troops had left previously, had been retaken. What's going on there now?
Well, over the last few days, and indeed in the early hours of this morning, which it is now, there's been an increase in the level of artillery strikes and missile strikes against the environment of Kharkiv, the sort of greater conurbation. There's also been, as you rightly mentioned, a very substantial troop build-up coming in from the Russian border, which is only 30 kilometers or so from where I'm standing, in that band of territory still in Russian hands. The Ukrainians pushed the Russians back from the city, capturing a number of villages. Some of them have already been recaptured, and the anticipation is that over the next week or so, the Russians are likely to launch another assault, which would add to the burdens the Ukrainians are already dealing with when they're very tied up further east around Severodonetsk to the north of Kramatorsk, in battles that foreign and Ukrainian fighters I've spoken to there are describing as a meat grinder, Anderson.
Sam Kiley, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Be careful. Up next, division in the Republican Party in Texas. The Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw and his staff were accosted, something that we touched on at the top of the hour. It happened at the Texas Republican Convention over the weekend, where attendees adopted a far-right platform. Also rebuked and booed another fellow Republican Senator, John Cornyn. More ahead.
I'm Isa Suarez in London, and this is CNN.
Free the Girls is an anti-trafficking organization that was started to help survivors re-enter the workplace through the sale of secondhand bras in used clothing markets around the world. My name is Dave Terpstra, and I'm co-founder of Free the Girls. One of the things that we discovered that survivors struggle with is getting back into society after they've been rescued, after they've been rehabilitated. How do they re-engage real life? And so we created a program that's designed to help them start their own micro-enterprise and grow their own business for themselves. We have women donate bras, and as we say, bras are something women wear close to their hearts. And this is an issue that touches the hearts of many women, and they want to play a part. They hear about these women who are traumatized, who have been trafficked around the world in terrible situations. And this is such a tangible way for them to reach out. When CNN first came 10 years ago to tell our story, we hadn't yet shipped our first container of bras. And CNN was there to record the entire process when that container arrived. That first container had 30,000 bras. We've since shipped 9 40-foot containers. Over 1 million bras have come here to Mozambique for our women to sell. That has transformed some lives.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
What in the world is going on in Texas right now?
A ruby red state gets redder.
Money is what's pushing Texas to the far right.
Why?
Really, really wealthy people spend a lot of money to get policy made the way they want it, and they get it.
CNN investigates.
I do not think that the average voter has any idea.
Is this about being conservative, or is it about control?
Follow the money.
CNN Special Report, deep in the pockets of Texas. Saturday on CNN.
Over the weekend, Texas Republicans adopted a new far-right platform at their convention in Houston. Several resolutions got approval, including one that states incorrectly that President Biden didn't win the 2020 election. And 2 Republican lawmakers and Texans faced opposition from attendees. As we touched on earlier, one of them was Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who's under fire in part for supporting aid to Ukraine. The other is Senator John Cornyn, who's helping negotiate the bipartisan gun legislation on Capitol Hill. Details now from CNN's Sunland Serfati.
In a stinging rebuke, Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn booed at his own party's convention in his home state.
We fought and kept President Biden's gun-grabbing wish list off the table.
Cornyn, the top Republican leading the gun negotiations on Capitol Hill in the aftermath of a deadly school shooting in Texas, interrupted repeatedly.
They tried to get a new 3-week mandatory wait period for all gun purchases. I said no. Universal background checks, magazine bans, licensing requirements, the list goes on and on and on.
As he attempted to explain the emerging deal to a disapproving crowd of Republicans.
That's the worst booing I've ever heard, but he deserves it. He should quit working with the Democrats to figure out ways of taking guns away from people based on mental health.
In a separate incident at the same event, Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw faced this angry crowd of right-wing protesters.
I bash McCain, rhino!
Forcefully confronting the war veteran, calling him a rhino, Republican in name only, for refusing to go along with the unfounded claims that the 2020 election was stolen, and for his support of Ukraine, among others.